Guys, I want to welcome you to another episode of the Advisory Board podcast, and I've got a special guest with me today, Wade.
Hey, how are you? Thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course, guys. So let me tell you a little bit about a topic, and then I'm going to tell you why you want to hear what Wade's got to say about this. So, a lot of folks in franchising, there are all sorts of nuances and challenges that we have, but one of them is risk management, and risk management and insurance are like they go hand in hand. So, I wanted Wade to join me because he's an expert in risk management and insurance. And there are a lot of crazy nuances in the world of franchising. You just got to be aware of, and if you're not managing them properly, they're not going to show up properly in your FDD. You're going to have problems with compliance, and the list goes on and on. And then you get to 20, 30 units, and now you've got almost a part-time job you got to fill just to maintain and monitor the compliance and the risk management. So Wade's going to share a lot of wisdom with us about how do we avoid those things, what are some best practices, things like that. But before we turn it over to Wade to tell you guys a little bit more about him, I'll tell you just a little bit about him, what I know about him. One, he's a great dude. He and I have met and chatted lots of times at conferences. He's a father of two kids. He's been in the industry for quite a while, in the insurance industry, and he's kept seeing these problems. And so eventually it led him to starting Rikor, where he's the founder and the CEO. So Wade, before I bungle it anymore, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and about Rikor and some of the trends that you're seeing in the industry?
Yeah, man. No, absolutely. Thanks, Dave. Appreciate the intro. Yeah, so a little bit more about myself. I've been married for about going on 15 years now to a girl I've known actually since I was 12 years old. She was probably my original crush, although she wasn't really interested in me until I was like 21 years old. So it took a long time. Hey guys, persistence pays off, all right? So just keep pestering those women. Wait, don't do that.
Hey, I got to interrupt you, man. Like, so same story. My wife was like the cute girl at these church dances I used to go to, and I had a crush on her. And then when I was 21, we met, and all of a sudden she gave me the time of day. It's freaky cool. I didn't realize that was your story.
That's it. Yeah, that's a different podcast, right, for that entire story, but it's super cool, man. So we're still at it, relationships and marriage take effort. Not that we're going down and talking about marriage, but I think it's super important. So aside from that, I've been in the insurance space for about 15 years. Actually, I started just as a retail insurance agent, selling small business insurance across the country. Fast forward about 12 years or so, and I grew a large book of business. And one of my existing customers was actually a franchisee, and she was part of the Realogy group. Her brand was Sotheby's International Realty. And she approached me out of the blue one day and she goes, Wade, I've got two problems. Can you solve for them? And one of them was certificates of insurance, right? Managing insurance compliance at scale and leveraging their buying power as a franchise group. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is really interesting. I'd love to be able to work on this. And I didn't want to be the traditional broker, right? I wanted to offer something that was unique and leveraging technology that we could use to like at scale with these brands. And so I created this concept. I went back to her and she just loved it, man. It was absolutely insane. It was totally surreal. And she liked it so much that she helped me iterate upon like my pitch deck, my concept. So she was in there like mocking stuff up, tweaking things, like, oh, you got to do this in this way. This is exact. And like, so it was like built by an insurance nerd with the help of a franchise person, right? Really, really cool. And so after a couple months, of kind of iterating on this concept, she calls me on the following day, 2018, and I'm wearing an inflatable unicorn costume. And she goes, Wade, she goes, 6 minutes. I'm going to call the president of the brand and you're going to pitch to him. And that brand had 900 locations, 900 franchisees. So I'm like kind of freaking out at this point, right? I'm like, wait, first of all, I'm wearing a unicorn costume. Like this can't go well. Second of all, like I have no idea what I'm doing, right? I'm just an insurance guy. I'm not like this other, technology kind of guy. And so 6 minutes later, she, gets me on the phone, talk with this guy, go through the pitch deck, and he seems to be, relatively interested. I'm like, well, I have nothing. So like, what do I do next? Like, what are the next steps? So I started doing some more market research, and oddly enough, I was introduced to Scott Abbott here in Spanish Fork, Utah. Mm-hmm. And Scott kindly takes my phone call. He says, all right, let's meet up. He's intrigued. Uh-huh. I go and meet Scott. For anybody that doesn't know Scott Abbott, look up 5-Star Franchising. The guy's incredible. He started 5-Star Painting, which he sold to Neighborly, and now is the CEO of 5-Star Franchising here out of Utah. And they've got several brands under their umbrella. So we go there, I show him the pitch deck and I'm asking him a lot of questions and he just stops me. Just stop. He goes, wait, let me tell you what happened to me. So he goes in to tell me his story. And this is relatable with every single franchisor. It's the exact same story.
Mhm.
He's a franchise. He's grown his brand to over 150 locations or franchisees, I think it was.
Mhm.
And he's relying on paper based manual processes to verify that every single franchisee has insurance. We're talking spreadsheets, pieces of paper, checklists, all that kind of stuff. It's not scalable, it's prone to error, it's going to fail. And so one of his franchisees lapses their insurance. It's a coverage that pays for an employee if they get hurt on the job.
Mhm. Yeah.
And one of the employees goes up on a ladder, falls off, and becomes a paraplegic, right? Worst case scenario.
Oh, shoot.
So unfortunately, he's in the hospital. Nobody's paying for his medical bills. All of insurmountable amount of stress, and they unfortunately have to sue the franchisee because there's no workers' compensation to pay for his bills.
Mhm.
And the franchisee doesn't have the amount of money necessary, so they file BK. And ultimately, this trickles all the way back up to the franchisor. So the franchisor is liable for the operations of every single franchisee. So Scott got pulled into litigation for 5 years and ended up having to settle for millions of dollars. So
Wow.
this is completely plausible for any franchisor. And so that's where Rikor was born. It's like, all right, how do we solve these problems? I
Mhm.
mean, they are infinite. And it's very difficult to solve some of these problems in the insurance industry because we are dealing with archaic um, solutions, the lack of innovation, like adoption of innovation. We're dealing with insurance companies that are 100, 200 years old. It's remarkable, guys. And so, like, it's fun, it's exciting, but a lot of franchises have these problems. So that's kind of the origin story of you know, how we started. And yeah,
Well, you also described in that, and I appreciate that overview. One, Scott is a good guy, and if you don't know him, you should definitely get to know Scott Abbott. Most people probably do by now. He gets around in a very positive way to help influence and coach people. The interesting anecdote that I want to kind of circle back on there is what, when we talk about trends or needs or headaches or challenges in the industry. You highlighted a couple of them there in just Scott's story to you. One is there's a funny relationship, as we all know, between franchisor, but when it comes to liability, that's not a joke. That's pretty serious. I mean, so let's break that down just a little bit and talk about, okay, what are the liability concerns that any franchisor should be paying attention to? Because a lot of these emerging brands, even the growing brands that are 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 units, a lot of the founders aren't familiar with some of these nuances. So if you don't mind, Wade, let's break
yes.
down for everybody and talk about the liability and the sharing of liability because of the franchisee-franchisor relationship.
Yeah, something also came to mind. I want to get to that. I also want to touch on something else, and I think it's really important. And I think it has to come down to mindset. And so you talk about a lot of these emerging brands. You have micro emerging brands, and kind of established brands, but still, I would say, relatively small.
Mhm.
A lot of these franchises were once an established business, and having a successful established business is one thing. Having a successful established franchise is completely different.
Mhm.
And there needs to be a mindset shift that happens when you go and transition from being the actual business owner to being a franchisor. And what I mean by that is the actual business owner, you may have, Dave, like you may have started a carpet cleaning company and you can handle all the different exposures that you have and maybe set up some internal processes and you're good to go.
Mhm.
Well, now imagine, you know, doubling yourself or quadrupling, and then that compound effect. You have 16 days, now you have 28 days. All of a sudden, you got 75 days out there running around trying to
Mhm.
figure out their own stuff to manage their risk and their exposure and their liabilities. I mean,
Yeah.
unless you have a process and a system set up, that's not going to happen. So you need to shift your mindset, go into franchisor mode, and start thinking, how do I protect the brand and how do I protect franchisee investment? And
Yeah.
so, liability standpoint, the franchisor, it's called vicarious liability. The franchisor is ultimately liable for all of the operations of every single franchisee. It is an upstream thing. What happens is the franchisee can get pulled into litigation. The first line of defense is the insurance that the franchisee has.
Mhm.
Liability insurance, workers' compensation, commercial auto, umbrella coverage, cyber liability, you name it, that is the first line of defense. And if that franchisee is not set up properly, not only with the right coverage, the right limits, the right types of what we call endorsements in my industry or modifications to a policy,
Yeah.
they can easily breach that line of defense, get past it, and then start going after the franchisor. And in fact, most of the time, the franchisor is automatically named in every single lawsuit. So that's why insurance is so critical, and setting it up properly. If you can't, it's okay, but setting it properly in the beginning is essential, because imagine a massive ship and trying to get that ship going in a different direction. And the more franchisees you add, the more locations you add, it's harder and harder and slower to re-steer that ship in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
Right? In the very beginning, it's like a freaking powerboat. You do whatever you want, you're good to go. Later on, it's like you got like 6 masts and stuff. Like you got this freaking utter. I mean, it's going to be real slow go. So
Yeah, that's a great metaphor for it. And I like the concept of the franchisor mind shift, because it isn't the same thing. Not
no,
even close. In fact, systems aren't the same thing. Marketing's not the same thing. Technologies aren't nothing is the same. Once you become a franchisor, all the simplistic aspects of running a business are gone. And
gone.
thinking in terms of scale, or thinking in terms of how am I going to manage this when it becomes this big, has to become the way you run the business, right? At least that's the feedback I get from my friends and colleagues and clients that are running, multi-hundred unit franchise systems. Is, you try to change something at that point, it's like a 12-month change management process with a professional change manager to make it work.
Yes.
Right? Like it's no,
Yes.
and insurance
Yeah.
is one of those things where you're also dealing with now a whole bunch of 78 Daves. That's a terrifying concept, by the way, of me running out there in that kind of scale. But imagine the chaos in the world, right? But
Yeah.
the fact is every single one of those guys probably has their own policy with their own buddy who they go
Yep.
bowling with or golfing or whatever, and that buddy has no interest necessarily in protecting the brand of the franchise, right? He's thinking, well, how do I shave a few bucks off for my pal here who's trying to run a small business? And so I had insurance for years, same guy, and I got it when I was in college, and he did not update my policy for 12 years until I had a friend, grown, right? So I didn't know. I was just like, I pay my insurance bill and we got insurance.
Whatever. It's fine.
You know what my liability per accident was 12 years later? 25 grand. Yeah.
It's terrifying.
Yeah, it's terrifying. Like I had a friend who I was like, hey, you can just do an audit. I worked with his wife, and he's like, yo, Dave, this is like near criminal negligence here. Like, tell me one car that you can replace for 25 grand right now. And I was like, you'd like a 2-year-old Nissan Sentra? I don't know, not much. He's like, yeah, what if you had an accident with a truck?
Yeah.
I mean, or a truck hauling a trailer or a boat.
Yeah.
Like, Dave, like this is not going to work. So that's the kind of stuff. I mean, I can only imagine that multiplied by the number of franchisees is the number of variations you're going to have of coverage, regardless of how well it's documented in the franchise agreement, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So let me shift it back to you, though, my man, because I'm no expert in this space. I just can see the problem. Let's talk about it. I mean, let's talk a little bit about risk management now as a strategy for a franchisor. How do we get on top of this?
Oh my gosh, such a good question. I think I want to start with like maybe before the how. I think it's actually important to talk about the why. So we talked a little bit about the why already, but I think I need to drill down a little bit more in that, because unless there's the actual why, the motivation behind doing this, the change management process is going to be an impossibility. Like you'll never get it across the finish line because you don't have the buy-in necessary from the C-suite. So if you're a franchise, depending on the size, but always it should come from the C-suite level, right? You need sometimes CEO, CFO, founders, controllers. Those are the type of people that need to be absolutely 100% bought in this decision. And the question becomes, well, why is it so important? I think there's a few different reasons. And I think each brand will have their own reason. I think one that comes to mind is having the exit in mind from the beginning. Okay. This is really interesting to think about. And often it's an afterthought. A lot of these brands, a lot of these emerging brands, existing brands, well, there is massive M&A activity going on within the franchising space.
Yeah.
Right? It's insane.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know what? One of the things is that they go through, especially the private equity guys, they go through during due diligence. with franchisors?
Huh?
Yeah,
Yeah.
insurance. And so if you don't have that all dialed in and buttoned up, they see that as a potential risk. And they're going to dock you points on your valuation because of you've left it to whoever, Joe Schmo down the street, and then, the agent guy, State Farm, trying to do whatever for your franchisees.
Yeah.
And so you have to have the end in mind. Maybe that is one of your whys. Maybe you're setting up a legacy and you want to pass this franchise down to your family. Okay, well, how do we protect the legacy? Well, you have to have multiple lines of defense. And we do that through insurance. We finance risk through insurance. So franchisees a line of defense, franchisor insurance a line of defense. All of the franchisees aggregated together is your defense. You can't just do it for one franchisee. Not just one franchisee has to have the right insurance. All of the franchisees, you stack it on top of itself. You got this massive ball, right, with like guns on top and stuff like that to ward off all of the attackers. So maybe that's it. You want to continue to pass down your legacy, right? So we got to protect the brand. We got to protect us from reputational harm. We got to protect ourselves from unintentional exposure, right? Maybe another one is we are in this for the entrepreneurs. We want the entrepreneurs to be successful. We want to be able to help them generate a substantial livelihood, or even the investors, right? And to be able to generate, a meaningful income for themselves. How do you protect their income? How do you protect their livelihood? It's through insurance again. So we're setting all this stuff up from the very beginning to make sure now that the franchisees have the proper coverage to protect their investment. This is no insignificant amount of money these guys are investing in franchising. I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands, if not sometimes millions of dollars in certain concepts. It's astronomical. And to simply assume that the franchisee will go out there and get exactly what they need to protect their investment and the brand, it's not good.
Yeah, I give that a 0.36% likelihood of ever being 100% done, right? It's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
No, so the great whys. What is there anything else on that list? I mean, those are sufficient for me. But is there anything else that you see behind the why that somebody should be thinking about before we start discussing the what or the how?
Oh, I think that maybe each brand probably has their own why. I wanted to throw out some examples to either resonate with somebody or to get them thinking about, oh, why is this important to me? Mm-hmm. What am I trying to accomplish with this thing? And, maybe that is a reason to sufficiently protect it. So I think we're good for the why, but happy to dive into like how to do it or what to do.
I've got one I'll add to that, it just dawned on me. But the example you gave of the Scott Abbott's experience with liability insurance rolling out as an employer, and you feel the same way as a founder CEO, right? I feel the same way as a president of clientele. It's also our responsibility to protect our people, right? Like because my company, it generates revenue and and helps people pay their bills for quite a few people. And so I feel personal responsibility and accountability to make sure that I'm taking care of them in a meaningful way. So if you want to humanize it too, I think each individual franchisee, they should also be thinking about the individuals that are contributing to their success, and also protecting those families, those kids, those moms, those, whoever else is at home from a total disaster. If something were to happen to their dad or their mom or their brother, whoever's working for you.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a great point because, unfortunately, insurance often is an afterthought, and we don't humanize it enough, Dave, to be honest, right? They don't think about that, like the individual person that you're employing right now. I mean, they could get completely wiped out, just like that guy. Yeah, the guy that became unfortunately a paraplegic, and you start thinking about his family and the amount of stress that they're not only going to feel for that moment in time, but for years to come. Yeah, insurance would have paid for that, all of it. It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I agree, and we certainly hope those things don't happen, but they do, especially in the trades. You're doing home services, you're putting up Christmas lights, you're washing windows, you're fixing roofs, like whatever it is you're doing, you get off the ground at 5 feet, and that now you've got some serious liability for people. So yeah, thanks for letting me bolt that onto the end of your why list. But it just felt like that's critical too, as a responsible employer at a franchise level, or a responsible franchisor, helping to maintain that. That's part of your culture, right? When you create a culture of protecting people at the unit
Yeah.
level, that trickles all the way up into
Yeah.
the really successful franchises.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So how about the how? No, I mean, thanks for starting with the why. Simon Sinek would be very happy you did that.
Thank you, Simon.
Yeah. That's for you, pal. All right.
Yeah, man, the how of establishing a risk management culture or whatever safety culture. I think a clear and effective communication is essential. And again, it's a top-down approach, right? If ever you are trying to modify, change the existing culture, it needs to come from the top down. Now, mind you, having participation in creating culture from the bottom up is a key component because they will have buy-in.
Mm-hmm.
They will feel a part of creating that new culture or the new core values, right? But it needs to be established and pushed out by the C-suite.
Mm-hmm.
The president, the brand founder, the CEO maybe, needs to be there, needs to be present, needs to be effectively communicating that consistently to all of the existing franchisees. I think that is going to be like paramount to be able to do this. I would say effective follow-up. You can consistently talk about it. What about the execution and the follow-up? So now that we're talking about safety, culture, and risk management, all right, what are the actionable items? Do we have deliverables for the franchisees? Is there anything tangible for them to go and take into the field and actually modify their existing business so that they can actually implement these things? So there needs to be some type of deliverable to make sure they have it. Like we're working with a brand recently, and they created on their own actually what was it called? It was like a risk management compliance scorecard. Super cool.
Okay.
And they tied in incentives to it because they see and understand how important safety is. And so that was a cool little tangible giveaway or deliverable to all the franchisees. So now they have something to take action on. Now we have to have the follow-up. There has to be follow-up. There has to be accountability. And so for that brand, I think it came back to some type of rebate participation with the franchisees. And so they got a compliance score, and the rebate would go up or down based on the overall compliance score. And so they were incentivizing the franchisees to be able to improve their overall compliance score. And just so you know, too, the compliance score wasn't specific to insurance. We were a bolt-on or an add-on to the overall compliance, but it is a significant component of it because they realize how important it is.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a few things there of kind of slowly modifying that culture. You presidents, though, you guys have so much influence. If you are not speaking and being vocal about this, it will not change. I will tell you, you will get pushback from franchisees. It will happen, right?
Yeah. Well, you're asking to probably spend a little more money on the right type of coverage. Not necessarily. If the franchise brand is leveraging their buying power and getting both huge group discounts, they could actually maybe upscale the coverage and keep it flat, but not always, right? They're probably going to have to spend more for the right coverage.
Yep, 100%. So like when we work with brands, and this isn't to deter any franchisor, but sometimes that question comes up. Well, what about savings? Can you reduce our costs? And my answer actually out of the gate usually is no. This is not about saving people money. This is about getting the right coverage in place. Now we'll be competitive. We have all the national insurance companies. It's the Hartfords and the Nationwides. Mm-hmm. It's no different than what most people are using, but we're doing it right from the very beginning. We're trying to reduce the friction for the franchisee and the franchisor, and the friction that goes across the board. Getting the actual insurance, the proper coverage, reduce friction there. Avoiding tax, after or audits on a policy, reduce the friction there. Avoiding the friction of litigation and lawsuits without any coverage. So it's we're building these insurance policies properly, so it's done right, so that way we avoid all this pain and suffering in the future. Mm-hmm. Anyway, those are a few of my thoughts on establishing the right culture.
Yeah, and let's dig a little bit deeper into the education side of that, because talking about it and being about it, scorecards, I like kind of where you're going with that. Have you seen anybody manage through the change effectively? And what were some of the other things that they use or tools as a franchisor that's trying to deploy this process? Because you're right, you got to get buy-in from the bottom up. Maybe we could talk about, I'm sure FDD's got to be a part of it, because if it's not outlined and documented properly, it can never truly become a requirement. And I think there are
Yeah.
plenty of people that have made that mistake already. So
Oh, yeah.
maybe we start there. Like, let's start the
Sure.
talks and then kind of trickle down from that. Any insights you've got on that?
Oh, yeah. No, I appreciate you saying that. Like, I probably just spaced. So that's actually one of the things that we do. We do it that when we partner with franchises, we do this, take this consultation approach. And the first thing we do is we review the FDD. And now there's a bunch of stuff within the FDD that's so important to make sure that we're setting clear expectations with the franchisee. One of them being the insurance requirements. And actually just above the insurance requirements, there's typically a clause in there. And what we have found is about 70% of the franchisors are missing very, very important language.
Oh, no.
And the language is that it allows a franchisor to be able to modify or change the insurance requirements at any given point in time. Most of the franchisor or FDDs don't have this language in there. They say, hey, here are your insurance requirements. And we all know there's 5 and 10-year contracts with those FDDs. And so now it's very difficult for them to get the franchisee to change or to accept something new. And so we have right out of the gate, we advise them to modify the FDD, either modify the language within the FDD or defer to the operations manual and say, hey, look at the operations manual. And the operation manual, right, we can update that at will. Whereas the FDD is a little more strict. We got FDDCs and all that kind of stuff. So I like the idea of pushing into the operations manual and saying, hey, insurance requirements exist there. We can change them at will. And you have to follow it because the exposures evolve over with time.
Yeah.
We learn about new things and we have to be able to be proactive in combating them. So then we dive into the actual FDD and the insurance requirement language. I love the attorneys. They've done a phenomenal job. I think just the challenge with just using an attorney and a franchisor is there's no insurance or risk management professional involved in that process. And while they're doing the absolute best they can, we often make suggestions. Actually, 99% of the time, we're going to be making a significant amount of suggestions within the FDD insurance requirement breakdown. The key here is that this is not cookie cutter. One size does not fit all FDDs. And often we'll go to the insurance requirements section and it looks like somebody just got another cookie cutter and put it in there, like a little copy paste, right? And so, yeah, the key here is to understand the operations. And I'm talking, we understand, like I'll just keep pestering like the franchisor until I understand everything that they do. And then I keep asking a lot of questions. And then what we do is we start to tailor the insurance program specifically to that brand. We're onboarding a franchise right now. They deal in proactive physical therapy for student athletes.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, right. Interesting. They have the mobile exposure as well. So we start going through this and there are significant coverages that were just completely missing. And it's no fault of anybody, just the fact that they just didn't know about these types of insurances. So that's something that's super important. So we have to modify the FDD, possibly update the operations manual, and then effective communication, right? Get that message out to the franchisees and then start to really couple that with education on the why. And it's much more well received. And again, that's something that we also offer to franchisors where we do a lot of educational webinars with all of the franchisees. Some brands like us doing them monthly. We keep them super short, about 15 minutes. Some brands like us doing them quarterly, and those are about 30 minutes long. But it's really honing in on the why and then answering any questions that franchisees have.
Yeah, that's critical. They've got to understand why. These are smart entrepreneurs, business people that they're trying to protect their investment. So I can see how once they get the why, then it becomes a matter of, okay, now we can shift back to another how, which is, okay, you've now set the standard. How is the franchisor, do you avoid the multi-million-dollar roll-up lawsuit by making sure it's being done, right? Because it's classic parenting move. You got kids, I've got 4 teenagers right now. If I ask them to do something, then I walk out of the room before it's done. The likelihood of it getting done is like 50-50 with my daughter and like 5% with my boys. They'll be like, see you, Dad. Franchisees, I joke around with people all the time, but they're the same way. Like you say, hey, we need you guys to do this. They'll be like, okay. And then you leave the room. They're like, woo, audit's done. Back to work, everybody. And it's not because they're being malicious most of the time. Sometimes they're snarky about it, but it's just that they're busy and they're running a business and it's their business. And they feel like, thanks for the advice, but I'm going to do it my way. But this is one of those areas because there's huge dollar signs of risk attached to not doing it. So let's talk about how do we create a culture of compliance and true risk management from the top down?
Yeah, I mean, after you've done all these different things, like kind of the what's, maybe it's that's where, unfortunately, what we see with most franchises is kind of like you mentioned earlier. It becomes a part-time job from 20 to about 40 units. Above that, it becomes kind of a full-time job if you want to do insurance compliance accurately and correctly. 50 plus units, 50 to 100. After that, you better be outsourcing that stuff. I mean, it's a complete nightmare. And then even then, like, you're collecting these things, what we refer to as certificates of insurance. And just so franchisors know, if you actually look at the small print on a certificate of insurance, it doesn't guarantee anything. It's actually not a contract. It's not an insurance policy. It's a pretty dangerous document that floats around in the industry, and yet that's what we rely on today. And so that's where technology comes in. Technology allows you to scale. Technology allows you to focus on what you should be focusing on, which often is, operations and brand dev. Technology allows you to be able to scale safely. So you have to find the right technology vendor that is aligned with your best interest, that gives you that consultation, that is able to give you that white glove approach and hold your hand through this process, and not just ask you what you want, but advise you on what you need, and then implement the technology, push it out to all the franchisees with clear and effective communication that comes from the franchisor. Don't just assume that the vendor can handle it. Franchisor does need to get involved in the communication to the franchisees so that the franchisee knows that, first of all, it's not spam, right? You get too many crap emails. And second of all, that it's actually super, super important. That's what I would suggest. So making sure that you have the right vendors that can help you do this stuff at scale.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I know this isn't meant to be any sort of an advertisement for Rikor, but I know you guys have a unique solution there. Do you mind sharing just a snapshot of a day in the life if someone's using your solution? Like, how does technology, because this is part of what you do, right? Technology that helps automate compliance. Tell us a little bit about how that would work in an operating that would be working with Rikor.
Yeah. So I saw all the hats that franchisors were wearing, and out of the gate, like the idea was that insurance compliance done for you. I didn't want to rely on the franchisor to have to do much. And so while there's a decent amount of initial effort up front, the idea is that the technology will be able to take all that stuff away from you and off your plate entirely, so you can focus on more productive things within the organization. So in a best case scenario, we've made it extremely easy for franchisors to get us the right data. We are doing integrations with core management systems. So that way we can get active live franchisee data. Again, that way it doesn't rely on you sending me some type of exported CSV file that instantly becomes outdated. That's the problem without real-time data. It's like, okay, you send it to me today, and then you onboard 3 new franchisees next week. Well, all right, now we got to find a solution for that too. So we just hooked in directly with your franchise management system, field operating system, and we're constantly adding more. That's pretty much it from a franchisor standpoint. We have a dashboard, we have a portal for them to go and check stuff out. But really, the idea is for us to show up where you guys do business at. We want to be able to push the actual reports to you periodically, so you can see at a glance high-level insurance compliance for your entire brand. Eventually, we want to push the data directly into your system, so that way you never have to leave your existing management system or field operating system. And then it's like, how do we solve problems for the franchisees? Well, it's all about reducing friction for franchisees. We couple all the data that we've gathered from you, and we ask the franchisee about 5 questions. That's all we need to be able to get the franchisee the exact coverage they need to protect their investment. So it's a less than 1 minute process for the franchisee. And then we turn around a compliant quote proposal that merges not only a quote, but the compliance requirements onto that quote proposal. And we go through there and we have a consultation with the franchisee. So we help them from the very beginning understand the why behind the proper coverage. And that really quickly establishes, like, oh my gosh, like, you're looking out for my best interests, 100%, and the franchisor. And then what happens there too is all that data is then gathered after the franchisee moves forward, and that gets put into our system. And so now the franchisor has complete visibility into all our customers, the Rikor customers, and then also the non-Rikor customers.
Nice. Well, so this actually makes me think about one of the other whys about doing it this way, rather than everybody going off and buying their own thing. You're kind of negating the value of the franchise system when you start doing it that way. What do you generally see as far as scale and purchasing power when you get a whole franchise lined around the same policies with the same providers?
Oh, it's incredible. The way it works with insurance companies is when we talk about scale and purchasing power, I think purchasing power can mean, in my opinion, it actually means quite a few different things. I think what often people assume it means is, oh, I can get cheaper rates. That is one component, right? Yeah, exactly. It is one component. It is not the primary. It's not probably not the most important. In order for an insurance company to actually physically, legitimately give you cheaper rates, it is actually an extremely arduous process. They actually have to file with every single state in the union to be able to say, hey, because of this program, we are going to be able to offer a 5% reduction. And they do that in every single state. So when we talk about a true program with discounts, that is the only way to do it. And the only reason an insurance company would do that is with significant volume. We're talking $3, $4, $5 million plus in premium, which if we're kind of relating that to a franchise, probably a franchise with at least 150, 200, 300 locations. You got to be a larger franchise to ever think that this insurance company is going to kind of give you some perks. However, what we're doing already with even brands with 30 and 50 locations is streamline quoting. So what happens is we will get everything pre-approved by the insurance company. And while this may not be meaningful for everybody else on my end, I know how terrible of a process it is to get you guys the right insurance. We're talking, I mean, layers and layers of bureaucracy and underwriters. It's remarkable. We'll get an entire brand pre-approved though. So when we put a DBA in there for that specific brand, franchising ABC, oh, bam, oh, we know exactly who this is, done. They know who we are now, Rikor. And so what happens is we can start negotiating on a better, not when I say terms, I mean better coverages for an actual brand, which is super cool. So they're actually offering us deals that most other agencies don't really have access to because we're able to bring the entire brand with them. We're already talking with different insurance companies about certain types of insurance solutions for a brand, meaning they may be borderline on appetite. So some insurance companies are unwilling to accept the type of industry. When we go and approach them and we say, hey, we don't just have one, we have 100, they're going to make accommodations to be able to do that. Plus, we work with the franchisor with the risk management tier on the safety protocols. We gather all that data material and we present it in a nice little package or present to the insurance company. They love that stuff. And so we just streamline all the stuff for the franchisor because of their purchasing power.
Yeah, and that's actually an important part of this is it's in buying insurance properly isn't just about having somebody sell you a policy. It's about seeing, I mean, I'll talk about health insurance for a minute. There are businesses, their entire business construct is to go to corporations, teach the people how to live healthier lifestyles, prove to the insurance company that now this whole corporation of 500 people are living healthier lifestyles and thereby justifying a rate reduction or better coverage, right? Because it's a lower risk. It's all about the actuaries on the back end making decisions that say, okay, this is mitigating risk, so we can give a little here. But what I'm hearing you say is working with you, right, specifically, or the right insurance partner to build a risk management strategy is a lot more about giving the insurance companies the data that they need to validate that you are reducing their risk, quantifiably, right, not just anecdotally. And then the insurance companies then giving a little bit of value back to you in terms of coverage or potentially cost, or opening up, as you're saying, a certain type of coverage they normally wouldn't offer to a roofing company. Now they will, because there are a bunch of risk mitigation practices in place. And
they won't do that. They will absolutely not do that for just an individual company. It's not going to happen. There's not enough. There's not enough interest there. But when you talk about the entire franchise, and like you said, those risk mitigation protocols are being, oh wait, every single franchisee is supposed to be doing this? Yeah, 100%. This is the way it is. Oh yeah, this is a game changer. It's huge.
Yeah. Oh, you guys do field audits to ensure compliance? Oh,
yeah.
That's perfect. Like I totally get it. The franchising industry should be like the insurance industry's favorite clientele.
It should.
But it's not until you get somebody like a Wade, a Rikor, to help support you in that process and build the right relationships that he's got with the insurance, as well as understanding and interpreting the franchise model to them. That's a whole lot. Man.
Yeah.
So Wade, I mean, let's kind of narrow down to a couple of key takeaways for folks. And I sure do. I appreciate all the insights that you've shared. How do we? You've talked about FDD requirements. I appreciate that. I think that's the key, right? Let's talk about maybe 2 or 3 takeaways you think everyone, if they didn't hear anything else, should pay attention to these 2 or 3 things.
Oh man, you're putting me on the spot, man.
I've got a couple in my mind, but yeah, I'm thinking about building a culture of risk management. How do we do that? Making sure things are documented in the FDD. That's got to be like the starting point for most of this. And then how do you deploy and implement an insurance change? Those are the 3 areas where I was like, if they learn those 3 things from this podcast, they're going to be a lot safer and wealthier people at the end of the day.
Oh man, I'm glad you summarized all those, Dave. I appreciated that. I think those were perfect. And then you stack on top of that with like a mindset shift and understanding your why, and then you've got the secret sauce right there.
Yeah, thanks, man. And ultimately, let's end on that note, because what you shared about your why, guys. Most people that I know that get into franchising after they've had a successful business, it's not because they're just obsessed with franchising. There's a big exit in mind. That's really the main reason you take upon yourself all that extra risk and headache and the investment of getting a franchise off the ground. And so if you're not from the very beginning thinking in terms of what are the Princetons and the Riversides and these roll-up groups that are buying, the Authority Brands, the HFCs, the Neighborlies, like what are they looking for as they're trying to find a new brand that they want to roll up and add into their portfolio? If you're not thinking in those terms today, that'll bite you. It really will.
Yep.
And so I appreciate you thinking in those terms and sharing that way, because that was great guidance for the team.
You got it. Thank you.
Hey, well, thanks for being on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks, Dave.